Welcome back, welcome back. Once named by the United Nations as the best country to live in the whole world, Iceland is now the first economy to come close to collapse because of the global financial crisis. A few years ago, Icelanders decided their economic future lay in banking, and so it did. Bankers and the government turned Iceland into a gigantic hedge fund. But what they weren't expecting was for this whole system to crash. Now, the nation of 300,000 people is experiencing what the IMF calls the biggest banking failure in history. In response, Icelanders took to the streets and drove the government from office. But can the new administration clear up the mess? Joining me now from Reykjavik is Iceland's brand new Foreign Minister, Ossar Skarphedinsson. Welcome, Ossur. We're delighted to have you with us.
Well, Sir David, I'm delighted to be with you. Al Jazeera is one of my favorite TV stations.
Thank you. We'll put the word around. That's very nice to hear. Very nice to hear. Tell me, your new Prime Minister, your leader, said on Tuesday, and I quote, that joining the European Union and Eurozone would be the best option for the crisis in Iceland. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I have said so several times myself, and I actually believe that it is very important for the new administration to point the way forward and to rekindle the natural optimism of the Icelandic people that has, of course, dwindled during this crisis when people are very, very worried. So I think that's the right path forward, and I also like to add that I'm of the opinion that if Iceland had entered into the EU some years ago, like I have been preaching for a long time, and my party, the Social Democrats, you probably could have staved off at least the worst consequences of this crisis. I mean, I agree with the Irish Prime Minister who said earlier during the autumn that, look at Iceland, look at what happened to them. This might happen to us if we didn't have the euro and the full access to the EU machinery.
Yes, I mean, actually, that hasn't helped people in England very much being part of the EU, but during this crisis, the crisis has gone on unbidden, and of course, we're not in the monetary fund, but I mean, do you think that the common market, now the European Union, is a great insurance policy in this situation?
Well, I have to disappoint you a little bit, you know. We have a kind of an auxiliary or associate membership of the EU, and I'll tell you one thing. One of the things that lulled the Icelandic nation and the previous government perhaps into what you could define as a false security is the fact that we adopted every rule and regulation of the EU, and we followed it to the letter. And we thought that this great and distinguished body, the EU, would really have thought about things, what might have happened when a banking system of our size overextended itself like it did. But unfortunately, it wasn't good enough for Iceland or for the European Union. Some citizens of other countries as well are suffering because of that. So even though I'm a very pro-Europe politician, it's still a flawed institution.
A flawed institution, right. And a lot of the leaders of Iceland have said one of the things they worried about was what it did to their sovereignty if you had full membership of the EU. And a quote here, and they feared foreign control of their fish, which you can understand. Who would want to eat a foreign controlled fish? But I mean, those are the sort of fears there are. What would the vote be in Iceland about joining the European Union today?
Well, actually, for many years, Sir David, we have had in the polls quite a strong majority for full access to the EU. There's a majority of the people in Iceland for a long time have been you know, very interested in the European Union, and of course in the format to this crisis, and during it a lot of people have looked at the euro as a kind of a goal.
And what do you think is the reason for Iceland? You were saying that being in the European Union might have helped, but what caused this horrendous crisis In addition to global influence, what caused it in Iceland? Was it greed of the bankers? Was it folly or stupidity? Was it why did it happen? Why did it hit your beloved country so hard?
Well, I think it was a combination of a lot of factors. In the beginning of this century, the banks were privatized, and they were not privatized in parts. They were privatized, all of them, 3 of them, at one go. And instead of having a distributed ownership, you know, they were really, by the previous administration, I would not use the word given, but they were allocated to certain politically privileged people, I would say. And, you know, the people that came into ownership of them, there was a lot of young, well, in my view, young bankers that have earned a lot of money abroad. And they were full of testosterone and the desire to take risks. Risks. And this combined with the ideology that was introduced by the previous government of what, well, you could perhaps call the neoliberal ideology, where the market should rule and where there should be as little rules and laws governing the markets as possible. You know, it was a combination of this.
Tell me something. I started by saying that Iceland was selected as the best country to live in the world. With all this crisis going on, is it still the best country to live in the world?
I can just give you a promise. You know, it will be. It is a good country to live in. And, you know, we have a very strong fundamentals. We have a fabulous health system that mostly is free. We have extremely good educational system. But what takes us apart from other countries that have entered into similar crisis, and don't forget, Sir David, we are in a double crisis. It's both a currency crisis and a banking crisis, is that we have some strong fundamentals in our society. For example, despite the collapse of the banks that were quite important for the economy, we still have our fishing sector, and it's improving. All the tidings from the oceans are good. The fishing stocks are up. But then for the longer term future, because I'm also the Minister of Industry, we've just tendered for the first time international licenses for offshore oil and gas exploration. Norwegian experts, they claim that these reservoir is perhaps the second or even the biggest untapped oil and gas reservoir in the world. You know, I'm not making any promises, but we have hopes and a basis to be, despite everything, a bit optimistic.
Thank you very much. You sound optimistic, and we're delighted to have you with us. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much, Ossur. Thank you.
Thank you.
A huge row has broken out here in the UK, but with very much worldwide ramifications. In a court ruling on Wednesday, 2 judges suggested they had seen evidence that a British resident, now in Guantanamo, Binyam Mohammed, had been tortured. But the judges claimed that evidence was being kept secret following a threat from the US authorities to withhold future intelligence sharing with the UK if the secrets were spilled. So it's a very confusing story, and to help put it all together and clarify it, I'm delighted to be joined by Shami Chakrabarti, the director of the human rights group Liberty. Welcome, Shami.
Thank you very much.
How much of that is true? I mean, in that story, I mean, did the Americans threaten the Brits?
Well, this has been part of the row this week because our court has used the word threat. It says that submissions made in court by the British Foreign Office and their lawyers were to the effect that they couldn't publish their full judgment as they would like to do and as they think they can without harming anyone's national security. They can't publish their judgment because of a threat that the intelligence relationship between the 2 countries would be, quote, reconsidered. Now, the judges in London took that extremely seriously, and they used some very, very powerful language about the inappropriateness of suppressing this kind of court judgment in a democracy that obeys the rule of law. And they said that but for this threat, and that's the court's word, and submissions made by the Foreign Office, they would have published their full judgment just the other day. And so this, of course, has led to, on the one hand, the main row, which is what did we know in Britain about this hideous, grubby practice called extraordinary rendition, but really means kidnap and torture. And secondly, what have we been saying to the Americans? What have they been saying to us? And have we somehow misled a court in order to suppress a very important judgment?
And so, have you seen the papers? I mean, do you know what's in them?
I haven't seen the full redacted judgment. I have spoken to lawyers. I have not seen anything that I am not allowed to see. But even from the open passages of the judgment and from the strong language of the judges, you can tell that this material will not compromise British or American national security in any way, but in the words of the court would be politically embarrassing. And that, they say, is not a good enough reason to suppress information in a democracy. And really what it relates to is the testimony of officials, both in Britain and in the United States, as to how this particular man, Binyam Mohammed, was treated.
You're not saying that they've been British government has been threatened again, not to mention the previous threat?
Well, it's very difficult at this point to really know who is influencing who, because on one level we have a new president in the United States who has said, you know, very optimistically and positively in terms that we're putting some of these practices behind us in democracies. We, as he said, we reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals. He has signed executive orders relating to the banning of torture, unequivocally, and the shutting down in due course of Guantanamo Bay. So one would imagine that it would be very much in the Obama administration's interest to clean house, shine a light on all the bad stuff that happened before, so that he can build his new agenda and better relationships across the world.
So there's that one thing that President Obama, when he focuses on this case, may do exactly as you wish. The other thing is, what happens to Mr. Mohammed? What's next? Well,
Mr. Mohammed is still in Guantanamo Bay, and his lawyers and friends await his return, which, when it happens, should be to the United Kingdom, where he was a resident before all this terrible period in his life and in our history. The question is, what kind of condition is he in? He's been on hunger strike in response and protest to his treatment, and one can't really blame that. What sort of condition his lawyers will find him in due course, we don't know. But if I were Mr. Mohammed, I would have some serious talking to do when I finally gain my freedom. But he is, we are told, at some point to be returned to the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
For being with us. We'll watch out for developments in that very tangled and sad tale. Well, that's it for this week, in fact, with that tangled and sad tale. My thanks to all of my guests, of course. Do join us again in 7 days for another Frost Over the World. Thank you.